Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Rosa and Rubini podcast, Making Sense of This World. My name is Manas Chavla, and as always, I'm really pleased to be joined by CEO and Head of Research, Pernella Rosa. This week, we're discussing the US presidential elections coming up later this year and why democracy is truly at stake here. The big question so far, and the specter that looms in every debate, is Donald Trump. We've gone through one Donald Trump presidency. The real question is, how similar will a second Donald Trump presidency potentially be? How likely is that? And how catastrophic might it be? What's the background so far leading up to this, Brunello?
So we got, of course, two main candidates for the position. One is the incumbent President Biden, and the other, of course, is Trump. Both of them are in some form of trouble, even of different form. Biden is clearly the only candidate in the Democratic camp, because this is what the tradition dictates. Once you have a sitting president, that's immediately and automatically the candidate for re-election. However, there have been numerous doubts from various sources demanding whether Biden is in fact the right person for the job, in particular given his age, and somebody says his mental health. And now it's not just a way of saying, unfortunately, is in a kind of damning report from Robert Hur, which is the special counsel that was appointed to investigate on the handling of in some classified documents that were found in Biden's own properties when he was vice president. Not dissimilar from what happened to Trump, but with a big difference. Trump clearly moved thousands of documents to Mar-a-Lago intentionally when he left the White House. Instead, in the case of Biden, just a few documents here and there were found by his own lawyers in his domestic property. So effectively, they called the authorities and said, look, we found these documents, how do we proceed? And though a special counsel was appointed, he made his investigation, say, okay, there's no wrongdoing from Biden, but clearly he's a man of poor memory. It's a sympathetic, well-meaning, unfortunately elderly, and with a poor memory. So now his mental state is not just a hearsay, is in a specific document. Now, can the Democrats appoint somebody else? It's very complicated. If they appoint anybody else, it would be like, you see, it was, he made something wrong. This is the reason why he cannot run anymore. His presidency wasn't good enough. And therefore, substituting him would be extremely complicated. Even if he resigned from the candidacy, so he decided not to run again, finish his mandate, but let somebody else go, it will still give exactly the same impression. It's like, sorry guys, I'm not apt for government. And it's not that if you're not apt in 6 months, you are apt today. So, the message is all wrong. Then people say, okay, let's try Kamala Harris then. She is the vice president. The vice presidents are chosen exactly for those circumstances. But this is even worse, because Kamala Harris didn't give, a good impression of herself. And therefore, she's not the right candidate for that either. Some people say, okay, sack Kamala Harris, get somebody else. This becomes the new vice president, and here you go. Problem is, Kamala Harris was chosen because she was the perfect representative of minorities, Black and women, or, for gender balance, whatever it is. Okay, so you get rid of Kamala Harris, then you lose the minorities, you lose the women vote. Not a good position either. So for some reason, whether we like it or not, the Democrats are stuck with Biden. And this is the Democratic camp.
Yeah. Let's look at the Republican camp on the other hand. I wonder if it's in better shape. I mean, there was a much wider race just a few months ago which is whittled down significantly with 9 months leading up to the election, lots of candidates dropping out, lots effectively positioning themselves to be vice president of potential Trump presidency. What do you make of the sort of Republican lead up to this?
So the Republicans seems to be, in theory, in a better shape, in a sense. They do have a strong candidate, the former President Trump, who has clearly taken the leadership in the primary election, and he most likely is going to become the nominee unless something very extraordinary happens. But what is it that so extraordinary that could happen? Well, the US Constitution has put together a series of obstacles to prevent people in the difficult position that Trump is, convicted for a series of crimes, under investigation for so many other crimes, potentially in breach of Amendment 14 of the Constitution that prevents officials at any level to support that have supported insurrectionists from taking office again. So is clearly the kind of candidate that the US Constitution and the founding fathers, let's call them that way, didn't want to get to power, change the system from within, and then remain in power. They were very cognizant of what they were escaping when they came to America, and it was the absolutism of the regimes in Europe that they escaped. So they didn't want the same in the US.
Yeah.
Now, if Trump were to overcome all these obstacles, starting from this ruling of the Supreme Court on the Amendment 14 of the Constitution, well, as Robert Kagan said, we discussed this a few weeks ago, he would have proven that a man is superior to the law. And once the man is superior to the law, then the concept of democracy is over. What democracy? Well, what we call liberal democracy, the one in which there is strict separation of powers, especially the judiciary and press are free, and therefore power is controlled. Then Trump, if that's the case, would transform the liberal democracy of the US first and foremost in what is called an electoral democracy. These are those institutional systems in which votes are happening and leaders need to be legitimized, but then effectively the judiciary is not independent, press is not independent, and so it's not a real liberal democracy, such as Turkey, for example. And then the next step is autocratic electoral autocracies. So there are autocracies in which there are still elections. Think about Russia. Russia will go to election this year. Do we know who's going to win? Of course we do. People might even say, so why do they bother having elections? Because this is just a step before becoming a closed autocracy, such as China, where elections don't take place and so on and so forth. So in the scale of 4, the US is a liberal democracy, but it may scale down, let's put it that way, from liberal democracy to electoral democracy under Trump presidency. So I think for all these reasons that I mentioned, I think democracy is really at stake in the US, and in particular, a Trump victory would represent a danger for the rest of the world. We saw during the last weekend his declaration of not intervening in favor of European countries that don't pay enough for NATO if Russia wants to attack them. I mean, this is, a declaration like this is like killing the entire architecture that was built after World War II. I mean, declaration like this shouldn't be said in such a naive way just before elections. So, I mean, these are very important and serious things that need to be thought about carefully. So I think it's quite clear why democracy is at stake with this election.
Yeah, I think you've made it quite clear how a second Trump presidency would be very different to a first one, no matter sort of how threatening a first one was. Second one, especially if Trump comes into office, he'd have to instantly replace key, parts of the federal administrations and Department of Justice and other key aspects that would, clearly affect American democracy and its sort of systemic underpinnings. and not just the sort of day-to-day politics that shifts every 4 years. So something we have to watch at the very least for the 9 months, but possibly beyond that as well. As always, Brunello, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you very much. Until next time.